Hi there, welcome to this video in which I'm going to explore using Power BI's hybrid tables, which is a preview feature with Synapse Analytics Serverless SQL Pools. I'd like to see how it works in terms of importing, incrementally refreshing data, but also accessing data in DirectQuery in real time, which is the functionality that hybrid tables can give us. So if we jump in to Synapse Studio, and we can see I've already created a Serverless SQL Pools database, Power BI hybrid. I've got a couple of views that I've created. The first view is connecting to my data lake, and I've got some data in Parquet file format. Okay, so if I have a little look, okay, I've got year, month, and date. So we have a little look at one of the folders and we can see we've got some Parquet data in there. Now this is just simple web telemetry data. Okay, I've got a user, I've got the activity that they performed or the event they performed, the product they viewed, the device that they initiated the session on. But I've also added the file path function to expose the date folder in the data lake as a queryable column. Now I'm interested in using that because when I set up Power BI hybrid tables with incremental refresh, I need a date column, I need a date time column. I can use the folder name itself, which is a date, in Power BI to do that incremental refresh. And what it will do is it will then partition prune and only select the data from the specific folders in the data lake that I need, or that Power BI needs to refresh. And that's going to reduce our data processed in Serverless SQL Pools because we only go and get the data that we need. I've also got an aggregate view, which is selecting from that base view. My base data in the data lake is about 2 billion individual rows of data across about 4 months worth, and there's probably minimum 120 Parquet files, probably more. There'll be more Parquet files in a single date folder. Okay, so what I'm going to do, or what I've done, is I've created a view to essentially aggregate that data, let Serverless SQL Pools crunch that data and return it to Power BI. Okay, so I've got my two views there. So if I select some data, okay, so I'm just going to do a top 10 from the base view so we can see what data we're working with in Power BI. So as you can see, we've got the user, the event type, which is someone can browse a product, put a product in a basket, and ultimately purchase the product. The product they browsed, the URL, the device that they were browsing and using the website with, and we've got a session length, and we've got our two columns that we derived from the file path function, including event date. So this is the column that I'll use in Power BI to actually do the incremental refresh. Okay, so we're going to switch to Power BI desktop and see how we do this. Okay, so we've got a simple report here. Okay, I've got two tabs. I've got summary, which is just a line chart over time, all of my data aggregated to the date level. So the 1st of September all the way through to the 21st. I've got 2.3 million, or 2.3 billion rather, events. But in my Power BI report, I've got 269,000 rows because essentially that aggregate query is reducing the number of rows. So if we have a look at the underlying query, we've got a single query. Now it's not doing too much. I'll open up the advanced editor. It's just connecting to the aggregate view. I have a filter in place which is for the incremental refresh, and I've just renamed one column. That's it. Very, very simple query. Okay, I've got my two parameters here, range start and range end, and I've added those as filters to this event date column, which is the column that is being used to partition prune. Okay, so that's actually in the filtered columns step there. Okay, so that's my source data. Okay, I've defined my parameters and I've linked those parameters in to the date time column that I'm using to filter. So if we close, then to set up the hybrid table, it's the same process that you'd set up incremental refresh. Okay, so as you can see, I've already set up my parameters in terms of incremental refresh and real-time data, but we'll step through that. So I would like Power BI to go back and grab a year's worth of data for the archive, you know, the initial load. Then every time I trigger a subsequent load, I'd like to load the last 5 days worth of data. That will be yesterday, you know, back the previous number of days, because I could be still doing some cleansing on that data, or some data could be changing. I'd like to go back and just, you know, make sure that I'm getting as accurate data as possible for the last 5 days. I've also ticked the get the latest data in real time with DirectQuery. Now, yes, it is a premium only feature. I'm using premium per user. And at the bottom here, you know, we've got this little review and apply, which will say the archive data is 1 year before the refresh date. The incremental refresh will be 5 days before the refresh date. Real time, the refresh date. That'll be today. That'll be today's data. And we'll see that when we add some new data. Okay? So after I've defined my incremental refresh, my hybrid table, okay, I've published up to the Power BI service. Okay? And we'll jump into the Power BI service after I've published, because what I want to do is I want to reset what I've done in the service. So I'm going to deploy to my workspace, my premium workspace. So I've replaced the existing one because I'd like to see a full load plus an incremental load. Okay, so now we've published. We'll jump into the Power BI service and we'll refresh and we'll see how that looks in Serverless SQL. Okay, so we've got the web telemetry analysis report open, so we've got our, you know, current day's worth of data. So if we have a look at the settings, what we'll do is we'll trigger a refresh. I'll just trigger it from here on the data sets. Refresh now. I'm going to click that refresh history. Now what I'll probably just jump cut to when the report or the data set has fully refreshed, has done that initial load where it's loading the year's worth of data, the 5 days, and then we'll look at the DirectQuery part. Okay, so there we go. So our data set has refreshed. It's done a full load. So if we close that, we go back into the report. We'll just refresh the whole page there on the report. So there we go. So we've got data up to and including the 22nd, so yesterday. I'm recording this video on the 23rd of December. Okay, so we've got our full load of data all the way from the 1st of September, which is the start of my data, all the way through up to yesterday. So I'm going to switch to the last 14 days, because all I've done is I've just created a column chart that's just going to show me the last 14 days, including today. Now today is the DirectQuery part, which we'll look at in a second. Okay, but I just want to jump in to the monitoring within Synapse Studio. Okay, so I'll refresh because it's finished its load. And what we can see is we can see lots of select statements. Okay, with data processed. 975 meg, 1.41 gig, 1.56 gig. As I said, there's quite a lot of data in that data lake. There's over 2 billion, rows of data. It is Parquet, it is compressed, but you know, there is a certain amount of footprint with the data. Okay, so as we can see, we've got a whole bunch of SQL statements that Power BI issued to Serverless SQL, okay, to cover the dates that we requested. Okay, so it went and got all the data for 2001, for 2021 rather, okay, and then it started to get whole periods of data. So my queries are going to have the whole year for last year. It's going to have the 3 complete quarters this year. It's going to have the 2 complete months in October and November, and then the complete days in December. Okay, so I'm going to have queries for the 22nd. I'm going to have queries for the 21st. Okay, for the whole of December. Okay, because it's whole periods of time that it's going to be refreshing my data set for on the initial load. This is the initial load after you deploy the data set. Okay, so if we go back in, and I'm going to trigger another refresh, so I'll just refresh now. Okay, now this should take a few seconds, so I probably won't jump cut. Okay, so let's see, let's go to the monitoring tab, refresh. Okay, oh actually, yep, so we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 queries because we've got 5 days. Each day is treated as a separate query. Okay, and it's completed, so it took about 15 seconds to refresh or reload that last 5 days worth of data. Okay, so we go back into our report. Okay, so if we refresh the report, we're not going to see anything different, okay, because we don't have any current day's data yet. Okay, so we've got our last 14 days here. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back into Synapse Studio, and I'm going to trigger a data generation process to add some data in for today. Okay, so I'm just going to run this bit of code, and all it's doing is it's loading some data from a source into my data lake, where Power BI is going to query that real time in DirectQuery. Okay, so I just want to double check to make sure that I've got that data. So I'm going to show some aggregate data. Again, this will take a few seconds to run. Yeah, a couple of seconds. That's 2.2 billion rows. That's not bad. So there we go, 23rd of the 12th. So we've got 48 million rows there. Or 48 million events. So I'm going to go back into Power BI. I'm not going to refresh, so I'm not going to do a dataset refresh because I don't need to. I've done the initial load. I can set an incremental load once a day in the morning. But my direct query, if I hit my refresh visuals, okay, so I'm going to get in the top left here, I can see it's running. And in a few seconds, we've got our current day's worth of data, which is a decent activity, right? 48 million events on the website. But we can see there we've got the 23rd of the 12th. Now I can add data into that folder in the data lake, and all I have to do is just refresh and we'll see the latest data. Okay, so that's how hybrid tables, we can work with one single table in Power BI, import data, incrementally refresh, but also get some direct query connectivity there as well, but just on the current day. Okay, because we don't really want to connect Power BI in direct query mode to Serverless SQL Pools for all of our data. Okay, it's really not recommended from a performance and a cost perspective as well. But if we refresh, okay, there we go. We can see we've got our queries that's refreshed data. Okay, so 2.37 gig. Okay, when we've refreshed data, rather than if we were to add all that data together. Okay, it's quite 28, 35 gig there, 28 gig there. to load our complete periods of time for all our data in Power BI, that's gone down to a couple of gig when we've refreshed for our current date. So you do have to look at the report that you've created, the visuals that you've got, because each visual is going to generate a SQL query against Serverless SQL. Okay? Anyway, so I hope you've enjoyed this video where we've just taken a little look at hybrid tables in Power BI connected to Serverless SQL Pools to kind of reduce that data processed over our data, but also get some direct query functionality in there with just the latest data, just that latest slice of data. Still some considerations over data processed. Yes, you have to look at that and look at the data that you're analysing in your data lake. But if you've enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing to the channel and liking and perhaps adding a comment to this as well. And I'll see you soon. Bye bye.